from Mark Byers once. I see Mark. Hi, Mark.
Good evening.
We said 7, so I'm just going to give a few more minutes if it's okay, and then we'll get started. Todd, you did say that this was going to be recorded for us.
Yes, it's being recorded right now.
Okay. So if any of you people, there's 2 things that can happen here. You can get back on the 4th or the 9th if you still have thoughts or questions. Mark has been very good about helping me through this transition. They've been doing this in PA for a number of years and have had great success with it. And so we're hoping that this is going to be beneficial to us. And so this will be recorded, and when it will be put onto our website, the NYSPHSAA website. And again, if you have any thoughts or questions here, we're asking you to maybe go to the chat room, and Todd and myself will see some of these questions and then ask Mark to maybe do that for us. And with that being said, I'd like to introduce Mark Byers. Mark has the same position as I'm doing. He's had a lot of experience with, as you well know, Pennsylvania is one of our top wrestling states in the country, and been very successful with all of their plans. And we're hoping that we can transition this into this 1.5% reduction in weight control. I think once you hear the benefits of it, and then you have questions, I think you're going to feel a lot more comfortable. And we will have a segment of this whole thing, not only the recording, but we're putting together our booklet to put on the website for you. To any questions that you'll have on this and how to do it will be also put on the website for you. With that being said, I would like to introduce Mark Byers. And thanks again, Mark, for doing this for us. We appreciate it. Like you don't even have to know, believe me.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, Marty and Todd, for making time available. And coaches, I know you may have lots of questions as we go through. What I'd like to do is just give you an overview of the use of the OPC, talk about what Pennsylvania does. I know it doesn't entirely relate to what you're going to do, and you all can make reference to that as we go through. I'm not intimately aware of all the rules and regulations that exist that have been adopted in comparison to PIAA, but like to have an open discussion. As Marty said, if you have questions, please place them in the chat, and we'll get to those. The first thing I'd like to do is just bring to your attention, if I could, there is a PowerPoint presentation. I shared it with both Marty and with Todd. I know they have a similar presentation. I'm not going to go through this, but it is located on the PIAA website, which is just PIAA.org. If you select wrestling from the drop-down menu, you'll see this item just kicking off your season. Some of the items I'm going to go through today have to do with our dates, how we put together our season calendar coming up, how we distribute the information. But more importantly, there are some go-to videos that are included in here that are provided by Flow. So if you just, again, go to PIAA.org, select wrestling, it's one of the first news items that are available to you. I do want to spend some time on the next couple of slides, and then also also then go through access to the OPC, give you an idea of what some of those screenshots look like in the event that you haven't been in there, or you have been poking around and just are a little unfamiliar. You'll see on the left-hand side of this screen is our weight control manual. I'm certainly not a desktop publisher, so that's why you'll see it's pretty minimal. That's just the cover to our manual. That's also available on that wrestling page. But I wanted to touch briefly about our weight control program. When we started, effective with the 2007-8 season, that was the first time that the National Federation changed the rule book that required states to adopt some weight control program with the intention of utilizing 1.5% as the maximum descent of body weight on a week-to-week basis. So we have been doing this for some time. Our board made a determination in our wrestling committee at that time to adopt track wrestling OPC in its entirety. So we kind of hit the ground running. The highlights here for us, and I know these will differ for New York, that first assessment date coming up here in later October, that represents what our sport medicine advisory committee recommended at the time, that our first assessments take place no earlier than 6 weeks prior to our first competition date. So that's why it's a little odd that it starts on a Friday, but that's when we open up our season. That second date of that last Monday of November, that's intended to be the deadline that all wrestlers have to be assessed and in the OPC by Monday preceding our first contest date. I can tell you that's a fluid deadline for a couple of reasons. One, if you have athletes like we do, in the case of Pennsylvania football goes to the second weekend of December, there are instances where you may have kids coming out late. We're not going to stop them from wrestling. But from the time that they join their team, it's intended that they take no more than 2 weeks to have their assessment completed and placed into the calculator. But you will see that anytime any late arriving wrestler that you're pounding your hallways, you're going out and getting kids to join your teams. We leave the OPC open until January 15th. Used to be the old 2-pound growth allowance date, so it still has some some memory there in Pennsylvania. But after that, the OPC gets locked down. But again, late assessments or last assessments are intended to be the Monday before the first competition date. And that's because what comes second, the appeal deadline, it is intended to allow appeals up until the Thursday preceding our first contest date. And again, those appeals can take place after 11:30. So long as the wrestler doesn't participate in a contest. So if a wrestler chooses to participate in a contest, we deem that as accepting of your descent plan, and they no longer would be eligible for appeals. I will touch base a little bit later on what our appeal process looks like. And the last two items there really are specific to Pennsylvania, our adoption of the 2-pound growth allowance. And then that Friday, February 16th, the lock date, that's when every wrestler's descent plan will flatline. So that determines the lowest possible weight class that a wrestler could be eligible for. That Friday is the first postseason event that takes place throughout the state. So our committee felt it best that everyone flatline simultaneously, even though you may have some wrestlers not competing in their first postseason until the week after that. Access to the OPC, we utilize on an annual basis, sending to our athletic directors. Access as team admins. Also, head coaches receive their team admin codes to access. There is a charge for the use of the OPC, and that's $30 per program. You can see that we attempt to get out well in advance of our assessment dates, which is that last weekend of October, well in advance, so schools have the opportunity to make payment for use of the OPC for both their boys, and for Pennsylvania for their girls this year. This is the first that we'll have girls participating as a sanctioned sport. And then finally, our high school assessors receive that afterwards. Our assessors, and I'll touch base a little bit about this a little later, but they are separate from the coaching staff. I believe that you all, and Marty, you can correct me, are using bioimpedance scales. Am I correct in that?
Yes.
So we're a little bit different in that our assessors, we use Lang skid fold calipers only. And so we do not use the bioimpedance scales. And that'll bring us to our next, and I'll go over this briefly because it doesn't pertain to you, but we have been very successful and fortunate to have 2 master assessors in Pennsylvania from the Pennsylvania Athletic Training Society lead all of our training. Every assessor in the state of Pennsylvania, even if they're a physician, has to sit with either of these individuals and go through their class. They're being offered this coming week. We do hydration testing followed by Lang skin fold calipers, taking measurements in 3 different locations for the guys and 2 for our girls. And then use of the OPC. if you all are all right, I'd like to go through and in showing access to the OPC, what screenshots may look like. I'm going to access my local school district where my son just graduated from because I'm familiar with the program. But I see that the chat is blowing up. So Marty, I didn't know if you wanted me to take time to answer any of the questions.
Well,
So the questions are about audio. No, some people can't hear and other people can. So I'm responding to those people just to tell them to check their settings on their computer
Gotcha.
or
Thank you,
log
Todd.
out and come back on.
Todd, some
Most
people are
can
getting
hear.
a black screen. Is that because maybe we've met the maximum number?
If they don't see anybody or hear anybody, then yes.
And then,
No, we're not at the maximum number because we have 227 people on here.
okay,
So they need to check the screens. There's settings on their computer, and they also need to just log off and log back on and see if that works.
okay, sounds good. Where were we at, Mark? I'm sorry, you had asked.
No, that's all right. I'm just going to move forward with accessing the OPC. Going to share my screen. Just want to make sure everyone can see that I'm into track wrestling. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay, so as a coach, when you log in, this will be the screen that you come to. And again, I'm using West Perry High School. It's the school district that I live in. It brings you into your schedule first. So this shows all the events that West Perry was involved in last year. In Pennsylvania, we require all schools to submit their schedules. And this year's a change. That's to happen again no later than the Monday preceding your first contest date. So that's November 27th this year. But the idea is that everyone puts their information in. Our 12 district wrestling chairs go through in an attempt to monitor the schedules to make sure that schools are not in excess of their maximum number of competitions. So in looking at it, we have a method of counting competitions in Pennsylvania that's a little unique, but that way they can take a look at each of these items and determine whether it counts as 1, 2, or potentially 3 competitions. So speaking to weight management first, this is a list. Zach Rudy is the athletic trainer, also the assessor that has been trained to perform those assessments. And you can see each of those times that they were performed last year leading up. And it provides for, here's each of the measurements that he would have provided for, punched into the calculator, and then that determines the descent plan for each of the athletes moving forward. You'll see here, coaches, that you'll have the ability then to see that the eligible date that they can get to their lowest minimum wrestling weight, and that's all provided as the assessments go forward under the Alpha Master roster. That's where you'll see this information for every one of your wrestlers as part of your program. And the last part of this, the scale that you see here, I'm going to utilize one of our better wrestlers last year, Nolan Ziegler. This provides his weight loss plan, and I'm going to attempt to simplify this as best I can. So Nolan has his initial assessment on 10/27. You'll see that he weighed 155 pounds, and that's going to show the lowest weight class that he would be eligible. Obviously, there's no competition during the month of October and November, so he's not going to have an actual weight listed over here. As we get down to an actual weigh-in, I'm sorry, I got to move some of my stuff around. I apologize. You'll see that he weighed in at 151.2, even though his descent plan said that he could weigh as low as 143.05. The fact that he weighed in at 151 recalculated his descent plan moving forward. So every time in Pennsylvania that an athlete weighs in, their actual weight is utilized to determine their ongoing descent plan. Had he weighed 143.05 or lower, his descent plan would have stayed the same moving forward. You even if you weigh less than what your descent plan calls for, it defaults within the calculator to what your minimum wrestling weight was for that day. The only thing that a wrestler cannot do is drop so much weight below their descent plan in an attempt to make themselves eligible for a weight class they cannot participate. Does that make sense? So using this as the example, if he was 143.05 and weighed in at 137.5, that would, by his weight, make him eligible for the 138-pound class, but his descent plan's saying that he's only eligible for 145. So he would only be eligible to participate at 145 that day, because by rule, his weight, if it was 137.5, doesn't qualify him for the 152-pound weight class. And I hope that makes sense to everybody. But you'll see in every instance that Nolan weighed in, there's a recalculation, unless there's an instance where moving forward that his weight is less than what his descent plan calls for.
I'm just typing in the numbers, yes, and then
So the one thing I do want to spend some time on is the consecutive weight allowance. The way that we handle it in Pennsylvania is that when you're building your weigh-in form, coaches, you have the ability to select whether there's a 1 or 2 pound consecutive weight allowance for the event. The way that we handle that is that weight is subtracted from the actual weight of every one of your wrestlers. So if you cause a wrestler to bump up a little bit and there's that 1 or 2 pound allowance, as long as they don't take advantage of more than what the pound allowance provides for in making themselves eligible for that next higher weight, that'll be subtracted down and they maintain eligibility for the lower weight moving forward. That was significant to us when we had the onset of this plan. It was something that we calculated a little bit differently, but through the work of our coaches association, also some things that we had happen at our team wrestling championship, we wanted to make sure that students could maintain eligibility as long as they didn't take advantage of more than the 1 or 2 pound consecutive weight allowance in staying at that same class. So I'm just going to stop my share because unfortunately I don't have access to some of the information here. Some of the X's where I'm at in my browser, so I apologize here.
So Mark, I do have a question from Ryan Palmer for consecutive allowance piece that you are providing. Can you give an example using a weight class and weigh-in?
So using the example that we just did. So if the 138-pound weight class is 140 for that day, and a wrestler's descent plan causes them that they could be at 137.5, that wrestler can take advantage of up to the 140.0. We are going to subtract off that 2 pounds, so that night he would be credited for 138 pounds at the weigh-in. So he would maintain eligibility for that weight class moving forward without any further descent. And so every wrestler gets that opportunity. The only time that 1 or 2 pounds is not subtracted from their actual weight is if that would place them below their descent plan. So again, using the 138-pound class, if a wrestler's descent plan was 137.5 and there was a 2 pound consecutive weight allowance, they weighed 138.5. Only a pound above their descent plan, they would be credited for 137.5 because they can't speed up their descent plan. Does that make sense? Or no? I'm seeing the next question. So when a coach enters actual weight, they enter 1 pound. So at the top of your weigh-in form, and I want to go back here to try to share my screen. And I'm sorry, I just have to move some things around so I can access everything at the top of the screen. My apologies. So going back here to the roster, and we're going to our schedule. These scales provide for the actual weigh-in forms. So if I click on one of these, coaches, as you build your weigh-in form, this is a completed weigh-in because we're using the 22-23 season. But at the top, it will ask you the question, is there a 1 or 2 pound consecutive weight allowance? So before you commit your weigh-in form, you're going to go in, select each of your eligible athletes here, and you're going to select whether there's a weight allowance. In this case, there was not. You can see it's 0 pounds. So in every instance, you're going to record what their actual weights are on the scale. But if you select a 1 or 2 pound allowance, as the competition calls for, that's going to automatically subtract it off of their descent plans then in determining their ongoing eligibility.
You see the next question, Mark? The question is, once you gain weight class eligibility, do you keep it for the season? I.e., if I gain eligibility for 145, but enjoy Christmas dinner and seconds and weigh 155 on 12/26, am I eligible for 145 still?
You may become eligible for it, but if you weigh in on 12/26 and record a weight of 155, your descent plan is going to be recalculated from 155 moving forward. So anytime a wrestler weighs above what their descent plan calls for, it recalculates the descent plan, and it'll just take longer to get back to that weight class. I think a little bit different, and maybe I'm not understanding the question well enough, is Pennsylvania does not require an athlete to get to their postseason weight at any time during the course of the season. You don't have to wrestle a certain number of times in order to wrestle that weight class. As long as their descent plan as of February 16th says they're eligible for a weight class, they may participate at that weight class in Pennsylvania. So the very first time that you see a wrestler using 145 at the 145 pound class may be for postseason. And the thought process behind that is if we're adopting the OPC, that we're allowing students to lose weight in a healthy fashion, in a systematic fashion, that if the OPC is telling us they can be at that weight on that date, we're accepting of that and allow them to participate.
Mark, they said they were just still seeing the schedule and not the weigh-in sheet. I don't know if that made a difference on the screen you were seeing.
Gotcha. It's a pop-up, so I'm unfortunate. I don't know if I can switch to that, but I'm going to try here.
The next question, is there a practice calculator so that we can continuously monitor descent plans as kids make a drop? The issue I'm looking to solve is an athlete trying to make a lower weight, spending 2 or 3 weeks in between weight classes and coming in too high and resetting their plan multiple times.
So let me handle this weigh-in form. I think it's now live on your screen. So I'll answer that question as soon as we get done here. So I apologize. I thought this is what you were looking at earlier, but this is where you would denote in the system whether there's a 1 or 2 pound consecutive weight allowance. And that would be subtracted from each of the wrestlers' weights. You'll see here that the coaches go through and they submit the actual weigh-in weights for each of their wrestlers. This was an individual tournament, so you just have you don't have more than just the 13 individuals being entered. So I hope that helps with your weigh-in form, and you control that. You control who you're adding to your weigh-in form. The other thing I'd like to do is show you what a weigh-in form looks like. I know I'm going to have to start a new share here. So just by nod of heads, are you seeing the actual weigh-in form here?
Yes, we see the weigh-in form.
Perfect. So this is the same information that we showed earlier before inputting the actual weights. This is something that a coach would present at the scale, whether it's a dual meet or a tournament. We have it listed as the eligible weight class is the first, the eligible wrestling weight, that's the descent plan as of that day in competition. And we also print out for the purposes, the last official recorded weights. And for these kids, because this was the initial tournament of the season, these are all their assessment dates. So that was their last official weight. If I would utilize another in season, you're going to see the weights from their most recent competition. And that's a fail safe that they're recording the information. I guess I'll backtrack and say one of the responsibilities in Pennsylvania is you have 24 hours to submit from the time you had competition to submit your actual weights. I will tell you, we had folks that were upset thinking this was going to take forever. And most of them either have an assistant coach or a student manager inputting this information on behalf of their wrestlers. I'm going to go back to, go ahead.
There was one question here that came up, and I know the answer. I just want you to explain. Can coaches see other wrestlers during the course of the year what their descent plans are?
Yes. So you will have access to all of your other opponents' rosters, and you can click and see exactly what their descent plans are as well. That's one of the benefits in Pennsylvania, is that what the OPC has stopped is that surprise weigh-in where you're seeing a kid 2 or unfortunately in some cases 3 weight classes above where you expect it. You're going to see the actual weights of those wrestlers throughout the course of the season.
So are you back to the practice calculator question?
That's what I'm getting to here. We'll just use Ethan. So you now should have Ethan Ray's information. And one of the benefits here is that you have the ability that you can put in test weights throughout the course. So I'll go back here. Ethan weighed in at 112.6 and he got a little bigger. So you should be able to see that what 114 did, you then as a test can go through and see what the effect on his descent plan is going to be. And this can happen throughout the course of the entire season. None of this is saved as soon as I X out of it. But any time throughout the course of the season, I can make changes to this that, again, on this date, he decided to eat a little bit, and it's going to show moving forward how his descent plan would be affected. So for the question from the coach is, you have a kid that's fluctuating back and forth between weight classes. You want to know how a weigh-in would actually affect. This gives you that tool. You just click on the descent plan for your athlete, and the far right column provides you that opportunity to test. The other thing is, as I show this, I think I need to put a new. So when you input this information, you'll see that you can even show that there's a 2-pound allowance granted for that day. And so when he was 106, and I click add, and I'm sorry, I have to go back and forth between the screen shares. You'll see that really didn't adversely affect him because there's a 2-pound allowance granted. So his descent plan stayed the same the whole way through in this case, a kid that was at his minimum wrestling weight. Did that answer your question?
I think so, yep.
Yeah, there were just real quick, I want to emphasize something because a lot of coaches have asked this question. I'm seeing 2 things. Number one, there's no longer an honor weigh-in, and there's no longer a 50% rule in New York State. So I just wanted to bring it out because that question's popped up a few times, and I was under the impression that most people would know that, but that's the situation we have now.
Marty, can you also comment whether you're going to be requiring results for each of your athletes?
Yes, and if they don't put their results in and their weigh-ins, they only I'm sure you're going to touch on this, only going to get one excused time. And then if they do that 2 times in a row, say they had a match on a Tuesday and Wednesday, and both times they didn't record their results and their weigh-ins, and they try to go to a tournament on Saturday, they're not going to be able to print out that weigh-in sheet. Therefore, they're going to be ineligible to wrestle.
Perfect. So that's the reason I asked the question. You'll see here, this was just a duel that West Perry had with Shippensburg High School. All the results are recorded here, which creates not only for your wrestlers, it creates a record for them, but then also starts building that for career records. You'll find this year that track wrestling is trying to provide for a unique identity for each of those wrestlers. So that way, even as they may transfer schools or find themselves at another school nationwide, we're going to be able to tie that information. The significance of those results for PIAA is come postseason time, there are reports within the OPC where we generate our power rating utilizing those results. And we request each of the coaches to come. If there is a seating meeting, they bring that information with them in hard copy form in case there's a challenge. Most of our areas have stopped doing seating meetings because they utilize all the information that is in here. There's no need to argue over which kid is supposed to be on which line because all the results are recorded and they all have agreed on a power rating for that event to determine the seating for the event.
Mark, just to confirm that only the weigh-ins for the matches and the tournaments can count toward any calculations or recalculations. Is that correct?
Yes, and for our purposes, every weigh-in counts, with the exception of individual tournaments. In the case of individual tournaments, because wrestlers are locked into a weight class for the entire event, so if it's a multi-day event, they only have to record the first weigh-in. We're a little different in Pennsylvania that for the team tournament, we allow them to change weight classes by day. An example of that would be a kid making their descent and is staying on course, may become eligible for a lower weight class from Friday to Saturday. Again, because their descent plan allows for it, we would allow them to weigh in at that next lower weight class. Likewise, if you as a coach are bumping a kid up because it's advantageous that second day in a team tournament to do so, bumping them up would cause their descent plan to be recalculated. So every weigh-in needs to be recorded with the exception of individual tournaments. Only the first day of those events need to be recorded.
Are all projected weights in the descent plan rounded off to the pound?
They are not. They're to the 100th of a pound. So I'll pull that back up. Sorry, I closed that down. So you will see here that the eligible weight is rounded off to the 100th of a pound. It is not directly to the pound. So there are instances where as a kid's making their descent, they may be using the 114-pound class. They may be 114.01. Unless there's a consecutive weight allowance or the 2-pound growth allowance, the wrestler would not be eligible for that weight class, even though they're that close. At least in Pennsylvania, we do not provide for a variance for a student to become eligible for a weight class.
The question wants to know, has the process caused some of your athletes to sit out competitions because of the potential lack of discipline in maintaining weight over the course of the season? How often do you hold kids from competing due to fear of resetting a descent plan?
We haven't seen it. What we have seen is that kids are not holding weight. I'm just going to stop my share. Are not holding weight as long as they would have previously. I know you had at one time that a wrestler had to be or participated a weight class for a certain number of bouts. What we found is those kids were holding their weight for a long time throughout the course of the season because of the systematic progression and going down. Plus, you have the 2-pound growth allowance that goes into effect. We have not seen kids withheld for that reason.
Mark, you haven't seen where kids like before the postseason they'll start, that what happens if they do not weigh in for like 3 weeks prior to the postseason? How does that affect their weight loss descent plan?
Without an actual weigh-in, their descent plan would stay intact. Coach is not required to record weigh-ins from practices. I would say if there is a flaw in the system is that we're not tracking the day-to-day yo-yoing. They can occur. But we can only control our controllables. And so it's actual competition where we record the actual weights of the wrestlers.
So say
That's-
my last weigh-in was like 147, and then my descent plan would be, the next week would be 1.5% below that. I don't weigh in for 3 weeks. What is my weigh-in now after 3 weeks? Does it keep going down each week? Or is it when I had my last weigh-in?
It would keep going down until whatever your lock date is as a state. So in Pennsylvania,
Gotcha.
it would keep going down until February 16th. At that time, the wrestler would be locked.
Even though they didn't wrestle for 3 weeks, it would still go down.
That's correct, because they don't have a weigh-in to recalculate.
Question is, how do we give the wrestlers access to see their plans on their own?
So in the OPC, you can give each of your athletes their unique code or qualifier, and they have the ability to go in. Some of our coaches share that information regularly. Others do not. That's school choice.
But coaches
What is-
will have that, coaches will have that opportunity because that will help them determine how they want to work their plan into their next match.
Yes.
Do
They'll know
wrestlers,
that if they want to avoid somebody, they're going to know that that athlete's not going to be at that weight class at that time.
do wrestlers have the ability to go see their plan and then do a test weight as well?
They don't have the ability to plug in the test weight. That's something that you as a coach would have to work with your wrestlers to talk about their descent plan.
You gotta kick your legs straight. You got the. That's why you're stuck.
It says here, do you conduct your weigh-ins 100% digitally now? Is there an option for that? I don't know what that means.
We do not, just because we don't have, I think that has to do with the bioimpedance scales being able to tie directly to track wrestling, because we don't utilize that. All of our weights are recorded, the officials sign it, and it's the responsibility of the coach or a member of their staff to record each of the weigh-ins.
That was actually my question. I was asking, can you sit with the laptop on your lap and input it digitally versus doing it on paper and having somebody sign it?
We would not provide for that, only because there's no backup to what you input into the computer. We do want to have both coaches sign off on the bottom of the form and the individual performing the weigh-ins. In most cases, that's an official. We do authorize administrators to perform weigh-ins in Pennsylvania as well. So we want that signature. That's the backup in case there's questions, because believe it or not, lots of errors are made in the recording of weigh-ins into the calculator, and we lock them down. We don't allow you, if you've made an error, to go in and make that change. They have to open up a ticket or contact me directly, and we ask for the source documentation, a picture of the weigh-in form, in order to make those changes. Some are easy. You have a 107 pounder that you wrote down 207 because you just fat keyed the 2 instead of the 1. We know that kid wasn't 207 pounds, but some of the others where it's a difference between making themselves eligible in their descent plan, we want to make sure there's a backup of that hard copy to confirm it.
If an athlete weighs in below his weight plan for a competition, is he not able to wrestle in that meet?
They are eligible to wrestle. I went over this just briefly earlier, that they just can't make themselves eligible for a weight class that their descent plan doesn't permit them to wrestle that night. So they can always weigh underneath it. And most kids that are trying to stay on target with their descent plans will be at or below what their descent plan is if they're looking to drop weight. So they're eligible. Again, they just can't make themselves eligible for a lower weight class than what they are allowed to participate at. But most kids that are eligible have the ability to participate not only at the weight they're weighing in, but also +1 by rule.
Does PA do anything to regulate scales? We all have shown up and seen a light scale or a heavy scale, and we shrug our shoulders because they're all weighing in on the same scale. Now a heavy scale at an away match can have an impact for later in the season.
We require the scales to be calibrated on an annual basis. some instances, the counties provide that, but in many instances, a scale provider or another group will come in and certify for them, but they're required to be certified annually.
How are weigh-in sheets generated?
So again, I'm going to share my screen just to go through that again, if that's all right. So this is the first screen. This is where you would build each of your competitions for the year. You'll note that each of these scale icons are green. That's because they've been completed. At the bottom for postseason, because after a wrestler's presented for the initial postseason, that's the only weight class that they're eligible. That's why these were not completed. But you will see, you would click on the blue scale, enter the kids that you wish to enter for the competition. And at the top here, you would just hit print. I'm hopeful you can see this. Maybe I have to start a new share.
The blue is only for postseason?
No, the blue are ones that aren't completed. Remember, I'm
Okay.
in a
Yep.
22, 23.
I got you. Yeah, I understand.
The reason why the blue is there is after these kids are presented at these weight classes for postseason, they can't get to any other weight class for postseason. It's a qualifier. So this is how they would do it. They would select the print button. We also ask that if for whatever reason individuals show up and they don't have a weigh-in form, and we've had it, as late as our team tournament for our state championships, that the host school makes whatever accommodations they can to make the ability to print a weigh-in form possible. So you just hit the print button and it generates that. I'm afraid if I do this, I'm gonna have to change my screen share again. There we go. So you see, this is how the form comes out. Again, it shows the eligible weight class, their lowest wrestling weight for that day. This is where you would record the actual weight. And this shows the last time that they would have weighed in, which this happened to be our state tournament for our team tournament that Westbury participated in. And you have the fail safe that you can check off that a skin condition check. So this is the bottom, the question about whether electronic can be utilized. We always ask that these be filled out. So again, you have a hard copy to follow up on.
So just a reminder that weigh-in sheet is required for all New York State wrestling matches and tournaments. Mark, you did say that you could see other teams' rosters and descent plans. They wanted to know how you do that.
So So I don't know if you're able to see, I have my schedule up here on the screen, but these are all the tools that are available to me as a coach. So under teams, I have the ability to search by any other team. So using Abington Heights as an example, these are all the different events that Abington Heights was involved in. Here is their roster. Here's their eligible weight class. And then here are each of the results. Then this is a dual, so it's this is where you can look to see what I'm sorry, switching back and forth, trying not to give you a headache. But this is all the information. You can also then see the actual weights that were recorded for that competition. And you have access to, sorry. So under this teams function, that's how you access all the other teams within your areas. We don't lock it down. They have access to any other school within PIAA. And this is where individual athletes you can take a look at. Has all the information about the individual athletes. You have the ability to search by athlete. So it's pretty robust in the reporting that's available to you.
Marty, someone asked if we could give a brief overview of the process that our state is following.
As far as the weight certification, or
Yes, and this entering their weights and the 1.5 descent plan.
Marty, it's Jeff. It's all gonna be in our track wrestling data manual that we send to everybody, as well as video links. And we have an overview sheet of all the changes for this year that'll go out that summarizes the major stuff.
Okay. Mark, has there been safety concerns with wrestlers in between weight class? Example, a wrestler having to wrestle 220 when only wrestling, I'm going to say only weighing 191.
There have not, and the best example would be Michigan that never adopted the 220-pound or 215-pound weight class. Those kids are wrestling, 195 and below, and still eligible for the 285-pound class.
Someone asked, what is the lock date for New York? Jeff, I think you just did this today, actually.
I did, and we were gonna do the first day of sectionals, but we have to talk because some sections have divisionals, so we gotta make a state decision if we're gonna do it the week prior to that. So we'll let you know.
Where am I here? Sorry about that. I lost my spot. Can you conduct weigh-ins digitally, meaning you can enter your weights into track on your laptop? I think we already answered that question. We're required to do paper. Can you show us how to give athletes access to their plans? How do we do it as coaches?
That's something that I'm going to have to get back to you on. I don't want to mess up anything of West Perry's by messing around too much. I apologize for that, but I will get you that detail.
Thank you.
It's just live information, so I don't want to make a mess of my own school. I'd like to go back in it to watch my kids play.
Are opposing coaches responsible for giving their team's descent plans to each other at weigh-ins?
No, the only responsibility, at least in Pennsylvania, and I think some of these, will have to be a New York decision, but at least in Pennsylvania, each coach is required to bring a weigh-in form to weigh-ins.
we tried last year, Mark, we asked our people to get into putting their results in and trying to use, the proper weighing sheet. And we found that a lot of them didn't do it. Just didn't follow through. It was not required. It was just recommended, so that knowing that they were going to go into this 1.5% descent plan this year, they could get used to that. So the one thing that we're going to continue to emphasize, and our committee is very good at doing this, is we have got to communicate to these coaches that you just have to, put your weights in and your results, and you'll be able to print out your sheet. And we don't want to see the possibility of coaches very laxed and not understand that if they do 2 consecutive times and try to enter a weighing sheet for a third match and they're not allowed to wrestle, we don't want to see that. And I believe that they can show up at the school, and the opposing team can allow that coach to, if it's available to them, to print out that sheet at that time. If I'm not mistaken, I think we're looking at that possibility. But we just need to emphasize to these coaches that printing out that sheet and putting the results in this year are for real. It's not a recommendation.
The one thing that I didn't touch on, are you providing for any type of appeal process to the initial assessment?
Yes, we have an appeal process.
Okay, and I'm not familiar, so I didn't know if everyone was familiar. I didn't want to muddy the waters with what we do, because I know it'll be different.
Yep, you're allowed one appeal within 3 days of the assessment.
Mark, our committee voted not to go with that 6 weeks prior. And I came back at our meeting this year, and I felt that we should. I think the concern was are you going to have assessors available 6 weeks prior? And is that something that was difficult for you or not difficult?
We have two schools of thought. And I think it's not driven by the assessors. I think it's driven by our coaches. One is they want to get their kids assessed as early as possible, especially kids that may not be involved in a fall sport, because that provides for the longest opportunity for their descent to take place. Some of them will be able to hit what, they want to be their wrestling weight within the first week of the season. Others want to get their kids into the wrestling room, getting them working out and not have that assessment take place until they're, in better wrestling shape. So we run the gamut. But the ability of assessors to be available has not been the concern. It really comes down to the philosophy of the coach. I would say the vast majority attempt to get their kids assessed as early as possible. Exceptions to that would be kids that are out for football, typically are just heavier than what they wish to participate in the sport of wrestling. But that's why you saw on West Perry, a lot of those assessment dates were late October, early November, because that coincided with or at least provided for the longest amount of time for those kids to make descents.
So that can be done any time within that first 6 weeks prior to the event?
That's correct. The OPC also, and I don't know if you're utilizing this or not, but the OPC also has a test function available for our assessors. That gives them the opportunity, if they select the testing function. Schools oftentimes will have the kids come in and go through the assessment process. For us, probably the number one reason why kids fail their initial assessment is they're not hydrated, because they drank a soda that day or did something, just not drinking enough water. So they'll put them through the hydration testing first and then go through and do test assessments. Gives them a good idea of where they are, whether they want to get a little lower when they make that actual assessment. But that can happen anytime beginning October 27th and moving forward.
And do a lot of your athletes take advantage of that? They
do. And again, I would say anecdotally, the vast majority of our programs get kids assessed, even if they are multi-sport athletes. If your assessment is in November, that gives you the better part of 6 weeks or 5 weeks before the regular season even begins in Pennsylvania. So that's an awful lot of time to be losing 1.5% of your body weight on a week-to-week basis.
Thank you.
Somebody wanted to know, what is the actual penalty for an athlete wrestling below the weight class allowed by their descent plan?
So for us, it would
go ahead, Mark.
For us, it would be a forfeiture of that individual's contest as well as the overall contest. So if it's a dual meet, that means you used an ineligible, no different than using a kid that's over age. We look at this as a health and safety provision, not a contest rule. So wrestling below at a weight class that your descent plan does not make you eligible, you're an ineligible athlete. Again, overall competition is forfeited. The individual bout is forfeited. All other individual athletes maintain the result of their bout as wrestled. They would not be affected other than the team loss.
We have that in place also.
Yep. What is the deadline for coaches to enter their weigh-ins after a competition? 24 hours or 5 minutes before the next weigh-in?
We ask them to do it within 24 hours. We, just like you, because of teams traveling, do allow one bout to be left open, or not one bout, but one competition to be left open. If they have 2 open events, that would preclude them from printing out a weigh-in form for their next competition.
Does PA use regional assessment sites, even in October or at all?
We do not. As I mentioned earlier, we have 2 individuals from Pennsylvania Athletic Training Society that train our assessors. The vast majority of athletic trainers working in schools have been trained over the course of their careers, and so they serve as our assessors. So I think last count, we had about 600 individuals statewide that serve as assessors. So we do not go to regional sites. We do it at the local school.
Thank you. Marty, someone asked, I would like to have my kids assessed early. Is this actually an option for us in New York? If we are not sure, when will that be decided? I think you addressed that.
Yeah, basically, at our meeting last year, it was voted down. I brought up at our meeting this year that I would like to see that happen. I don't believe it could ever happen at this point in time because we're already into October and we would have, Todd, we would have to get that all approved. I would assume through the central or executive committee. Am I right about that?
That is correct. It would not happen for this current school year.
But it could happen for next year. I spoke strongly in belief of this after talking with Mark a number of times, that I personally believe that this would be great for our elite athletes and a lot of our heavier athletes, you know, that would give them that opportunity to start their descent plan 6 weeks prior to the start of the season. So we're going to bring that up again. And it's my hope, and I hope that our committee will feel the same way, that maybe we should definitely try to put this in. And if so, we could probably, without any question, if they agree to do this, then we could have this installed for next year.
Let's see. To clarify, there are no longer blank weigh-in forms before each competition. We have to print out the updated form. Is that correct? The answer is yes, right, Marty?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Mark, how often do wrestlers in PA fail the hydration test as to not add too much water weight to their initial cert?
So I would say that's probably the leading cause of failed assessments, but those kids, all they have to do is wait 24 hours and come back to be retested. You know, assessors working within their school districts tend to make themselves available. We have very good folks in our athletic trainers. So we do get that question that a kid will, I think it's a little bit of hyperbole that a kid will drink a gallon of water. Everybody knows as wrestlers, you don't drink a gallon of water in a day. But you look at it that 7% body fat is 7% body fat. Yes, there may be additional weight, but we're still talking about there's skin calipers that are making a determination of what that body fat percentage is. So if anything, all that does is cause them some additional time to get down to what that minimum wrestling weight would be.
Mark, if in Pennsylvania, if a coach misses a competition and gets that grace period, doesn't that affect, but it won't affect the wrestler's descent plan, i.e. kid's supposed to weigh in at 126, but on Wednesday weighed in at 132. The coach doesn't put the weigh in and is now the kid wrestled again Saturday, but his plan won't represent the change to the 132 weigh-in.
You're exactly right. That's the biggest risk in not entering your weights is the potential. I answered the question earlier about the use of an ineligible athlete. That's exactly what is risked by not entering the weights moving forward. So once those are recalculated, you know, eventually the coach has to put that information in. It's going to show that the actual weight of that subsequent match that they used an ineligible athlete because the descent plan recalculated when it was finally entered. And in our case, I think the penalty's too steep with the forfeiture of competition. We just haven't seen it happen.
So an athletic trainer that is certified assessor in PA is allowed to do weight assessment at his school or her school?
Yes, our assessors are not all athletic trainers. Believe it or not, we have some physicians that have gone through the training. We also have school nurses oftentimes that serve in that capacity. So it's anyone in the medical professional. We rely on PATs to make a determination whether they think it's appropriate. The only thing that we preclude is it can't be a member of the active coaching staff.
Thank you. That was the next question. What does a dual meet weigh-in sheet look like for a 50-person team? Is it sorted by eligible weight class?
It's going to go in descending order. That's correct. It'll start with the, well, for you, I believe the 98-pound class, and it'll go in ascending order after that. So you'll just have 2 pages worth of kids to get through, if not 3, if it's 50.
In New York, is the first weigh-in going to be the weight certs on November the 18th? That's what you had on the right-hand column, right, Mark? And that one, once they got certified the first time, and then when they went to the first weigh-in, the last certification was the last column was their weight certification. I think that's what the question is.
In that example that I showed, that was because I clicked on the first competition for the year. that last column will show what the actual last weigh-in recorded was for each of those kids for Westbury. Again, because it was the first competition, it showed their assessment date or their assessment weigh-in. For any matches moving forward into the season, it would show their most recent match in which they weighed in.
Is there a notification if an ineligible wrestler was wrestled below his descent plan?
They're going to show up in red in their descent plan. The actual weight is going to show up in red and indicate the use of an ineligible.
It sounds like PA allows for a failed hydration test. Somebody just.
We do not. If they fail the hydration test, they have to wait 24 hours before they could be tested again. So they don't even go forward with stepping on the scale for the assessment process if they failed hydration testing.
That's the same here. I'll ask this quick question. How many times do you allow that to happen to an athlete?
We don't have a maximum. We do have a policy to request relief from the hydration testing. There are certain instances where athletes have a very difficult time because of the condition that they may have in being hydrated. That's a determination made by the executive director. But I can tell you in most instances, that's been turned down because the kids are able to be in a hydrated state and just choose not to.
Are you able to print out weigh-in sheets for other teams? We host a fairly large individual tournament run on track and had been printing all 26 weigh-in sheets.
I don't know if I can answer that question, but if it's in track, you should be able to follow that same process because these are all generated out of track.
I run a very large tournament too. It's called Eastern States, and we said that tournament directors can print their own weigh-in sheets. However, each team participating in the tournament is going to have to bring their track sheet to show the eligible weight classes for their kids for that tournament. So if, for example, in Eastern States, the kids would weigh in on the Eastern States weigh-in sheet, their weight would be recorded there, the sheet would be given to the coach, and the coach would transfer the weight to their own weigh-in sheet and then enter it into track.
The first descent plan for a New York wrestler starts at certification or at first competition. And from my understanding, it's going to start at certification. Once they get assessed at the certification, then a descent plan will be established for them. Is that correct, Mark?
That's how it would work in Pennsylvania. Yes, those dates that you saw late October, early November, that starts the descent plan for those athletes.
Just to be clear to everybody, we just want to make sure that you can see other teams' wrestlers' descent plans.
You know, as I
Correct.
was messing around, that's going to be something else I have to look at. It was my understanding that you could, but I will get back to you. I know you can see the actual weights from just poking around, but I did not see a place to see their descent plan. So I will get back to you on that.
Thank you, Mark. And please remember, we will be doing this session on Wednesday, and then we will be doing this session on next Monday as well. You're welcome to join us, but we will be recording all three sessions. They will be listed on our NYSPHSAA website under the wrestling landing page. So Mark will get those answers for us on Wednesday. I don't see any other questions at this time. It's been an hour. I really appreciate Mark taking the time out of his busy schedule to meet with us here in New York. Obviously, this is a big significant change. This is not a change that the wrestling committee took lightly. It's a change that, that has been discussed for many years now. And I commend Marty and his committee for doing their due diligence. And I'd just like to thank Mark Byers from the PIAA for all of his assistance in helping us and participating in this webinar along with the one on Wednesday and the one on Monday. You can use the same link for those webinars. So we will see you on Wednesday.
Mark, thanks so much. You know how much I appreciate this, and it's really been helpful for what you've said so far tonight, and everybody that's on here tonight. Again, if you want to get back on Wednesday, if you had other questions or things that come up, please feel free. We've set this up for 500 people, and I think, Todd, we got over 200 or so tonight. So that's good. And again, Mark, thanks so much. Very appreciative.
Appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully I get better Wednesday and Monday.
I don't know how much better you can get. To be honest with you.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.